Growing up in a small country in Southeast Asia that will remain unnamed, the Hungry Ghost Festival was always a time of caution and reverence. My grandmother used to tell me stories about the restless spirits that roamed the earth during this month. "Keep the ghosts happy," she would say, "and they won't bother you." I believed her, mostly out of respect and a bit of fear. But this year, something changed. This year, I learned that some ghosts aren't content with mere offerings. The festival had just begun, and the streets were alive with the smell of incense and the sight of paper money burning in large metal bins. My friends and I decided to visit a secluded park known for its eerie atmosphere. We thought it would be fun to scare ourselves, a harmless bit of thrill-seeking. We were young and foolish. We arrived at the park just before midnight, the air thick with humidity and the sounds of cicadas filling the night. The park was deserted, as most sensible people were at home or at the temples, offering prayers and food to appease the spirits. We set up our small picnic near an old, gnarled tree and began telling ghost stories, our voices hushed and excited. As the night grew darker, one of my friends, Daniel, suggested we perform a ritual he had read about online. It was supposed to summon spirits, a game to test our courage. At first, we laughed it off, but the more he insisted, the more intrigued we became. He assured us it was just a bit of fun. Nothing would really happen. We formed a circle around a small offering we had hastily put together. Some fruits, a bowl of rice, and a few joss sticks. Daniel lit the incense and began chanting words he claimed were part of the ritual. I felt a chill run down my spine as he spoke, the air around us seeming to grow colder despite the stifling heat. As the chanting continued, I began to feel a sense of unease. The shadows cast by the flickering flames seemed to dance and twist in unnatural ways. Suddenly, the wind picked up, swirling the leaves around us in a frenzy. The air grew thick with the smell of rotting meat, and a sense of dread settled over me. "Stop, Daniel. This isn't funny anymore," I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. But he seemed entranced. His eyes glazed over as he continued the incantation. The rest of my friends shifted uncomfortably, clearly as unnerved as I was. Just as I reached out to shake him, the wind stopped abruptly, and an oppressive silence fell over the park. We all stood there, frozen, our breaths held in anticipation. That's when we heard it, a low, guttural moan coming from the darkness beyond the tree line. My heart pounded in my chest as I scanned the area, trying to locate the source of the sound. Out of the shadows emerged a figure, tall and gaunt, its eyes glowing with an eerie, unnatural light. Its face was twisted in a grotesque mask of pain and anger, and its bony fingers reached out toward us. I felt a scream rise in my throat, but I was too terrified to make a sound. "Run!" someone finally shouted, and we all bolted, our terror giving us wings. I could hear the thing behind us, its heavy footsteps echoing in the night. We didn't stop until we were well out of the park, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. We huddled together on the sidewalk, trying to make sense of what had just happened. "What the hell was that?" Lisa, my best friend, whispered, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. None of us had an answer. The rest of the night was a blur. We returned to our homes, too scared to speak of the events. I barely slept, my mind replaying the horrifying encounter over and over. The next morning, I found out that Daniel hadn't come home. His parents were frantic, calling everyone to see if they knew where he was. We returned to the park with the police, but there was no sign of him. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. The only thing we found was the scattered remnants of our offering and the burnt-out incense sticks. The air still carried that sickly sweet smell of decay. Days turned into weeks, and there was still no sign of Daniel. The police eventually labeled him as missing, but I knew the truth. I could still hear the whispers at night, feel the cold presence that lingered just beyond my sight. The Hungry Ghost Festival ended, but the nightmares didn't. One evening, I decided to visit my grandmother. She had always been my rock, and I needed her wisdom now more than ever. As I recounted the events of that night, her expression grew more and more grave. When I finished, she reached out and clasped my hands tightly. "You've angered a powerful spirit," she said, her voice trembling. "The offerings were not enough. You must go back and make amends, or you will never find peace." Despite my fear, I knew she was right. The next night, armed with more substantial offerings and a newfound respect for the rituals, I returned to the park. I could feel the eyes watching me from the shadows as I set up the altar, my hands shaking. I lit the incense and bowed deeply, praying for forgiveness and for Daniel's safe return. The wind picked up again, but this time it was gentle, almost comforting. I felt a presence behind me and turned slowly. There, standing just beyond the flickering light of the candles, was Daniel. His face was pale and his eyes hollow, but he smiled at me. Relief flooded through me as I reached out to him, but before I could touch him, he faded into the darkness. I finished the ritual, tears streaming down my face, and packed up the offerings. As I left the park, I felt a strange sense of calm. The nightmares stopped, and the whispers faded. I never saw Daniel again, but I like to think that his spirit found peace. For me, the Hungry Ghost Festival is not a tradition anymore. To me, it represents the thin line that has been etched between our world and the next, and turns to respect for those who came before us. I will never forget the lesson I learned that year, and I will never again take the spirit's rest for granted.